Do you want to be the very best, like no one ever was? This week, we discuss tips and tricks on how to be the best possible D&D player you can be. Hello players and GMs, I am Reese, and welcome to another video by Jetpack7. Before we get started, I just want to remind you to please like, comment, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. The closer we get to 1,000 subscribers, the closer we get to a nice little giveaway. If you have any ideas what we should give away, let us know in the comments. Otherwise, thank you to everyone who has been commenting on the videos. It's been super fun talking to all of you, and I look forward to more conversations like that. This week, I wanted to take a break from all the analytics. I ranked all 12 of the cleric domains last week, and that was difficult, to say the least. If you want to watch me struggle with that, the link to that video is in the description box. So, I figured the best way to avoid anything too complicated would be to bring it back to the basics and discuss some tips on how to be a great D&D player. Now, I've made videos on things to avoid while playing and DMing, but I've not actually just given basic tips on what to do while you're playing. Generally speaking, all these tips are habits that you should build up over time, and each of them will make your GM love running the game for you. Trust me on this one. I have a few players who are not only good friends of mine, but will always have a permanent seat at my table because they've adopted these habits loyally. If you've seen my previous videos, you know that being a good player in D&D has nothing to do with mechanical knowledge or building super efficient characters, and everything to do with how you conduct yourself at the table. Now, of course, this means doing basic stuff like not being a piece of shit. But there are also a few more specific things you can do that will make the entire game run more smoothly and make an already fun game even funner. So let's go ahead and jump right in with the first tip: know your character. Now, of course, you want to know your character's backstory and personality and all that jazz, but you also want to know what your character is able to do. The basic mechanics. Being a good player in D&D has nothing to do with mechanical knowledge. I know that sounds like a contradiction, but I don't mean that you should have an intimate understanding of the mechanical interactions between your character's features and the monsters you're fighting, just that you should know when your features come into play. Say you're playing a rogue and you run forward to stab a monster. As a rogue, you should at least know that you have the ability to sneak attack. You don't necessarily need to know what all the conditions are for your sneak attack to apply, though it is helpful. All you need to be able to do at that point is ask, does sneak attack apply here? Because then your GM will be able to decide whether or not it applies. There are a bunch of features like that in the game, so it can get overwhelming. That's why your character sheet exists. When you're creating your character sheet, make sure to include all the features that you get. That includes features from your race, your background, your class and its archetype, and any feats you take along the way. The reason you still want to be at least reasonably familiar with all that stuff is that staring down at your character sheet during combat can cause a bit of a drag. You usually want to be able to quickly glance down and find what you're looking for. Combat already gets slowed down quite a bit simply by its nature, but being familiar with your character to at least a basic level can really help speed it up. Which is actually a nice segue into my next tip and another method for speeding up combat. Think ahead. It sounds pretty freaking obvious, right? Just think ahead. But when you're playing through combat, it's really easy to lose track of your character and just pay attention to what other people are doing. This is when multitasking helps out a bit. Yes, you always want to pay attention to what the other players are doing and what the GM is doing on the field, but you also want to be thinking about what your next move is going to be. Anybody who's played a decent amount of D&D knows that a lot can change in a single round of combat, so you have to pay attention and be willing to change your plan when crap inevitably hits the fan. This particularly applies to spellcasters. There's no denying that playing a martial character is a more straightforward combat experience. Most of your turns are going to consist of running up and smacking stuff with your weapons. The choices you make usually boil down to which monster needs to die now and which one can wait to die until later. As a spellcaster, you have tons of options available to you. I'm a bit more lenient with my spellcasters when it comes to time spent per turn because of that, but I still like for them to commit to an action quickly. There have been many times when I've pressured my players to act by telling them, I need your action. And even though I don't like doing that, it's sometimes necessary, and many times it could have been avoided if they had just been thinking about their turn before it came up in the initiative order. Now, while thinking ahead may seem obvious, there are a lot of little things that can happen in combat that you can think of before your turn comes around. The biggest thing is measuring distance. Your character has a set amount they can move per turn, so in between turns, you need to figure out whether or not you can actually reach the place you want to go. That way you don't get flustered when you realize you can't actually do what you planned to do before. It's a lot of stuff like that. Don't just have a plan. Make sure the conditions necessary for your plan to go through are met. That way, when your turn is up, you can rattle off everything you do without adding too much time to an already long encounter. The next tip is a simple one. Don't be too serious. This one goes for DMs and players. We love to get caught up in the drama. We've all seen the heartfelt moments of dramatic tension and raw emotion in Critical Role and in our own house campaigns, and they're absolutely beautiful. It stands to reason that we would want to recreate those moments. But you have to realize that those moments don't happen often, and to force them to happen too often ends up cheapening the impact. A beautiful theatrical moment only happens here and there in your average campaign, and the space in between is generally filled with clown-like absurdity that D&D has become so famous for. As a player and as a GM, don't be so attached to the darkness of the world that you've created. Embrace the goofiness, love the weird, and let yourself get lost in those moments of high fantasy BS that can only happen when a good group of friends sit down at the table. I would go so far as to say that it is because of the frequent absurdity that those juicy dramatic moments are even possible. Without regular jokes bringing your campaign to a high point, the low points don't have nearly as much impact or weight. D&D is a game of dynamics, so don't be afraid to let your big bad guy's monologue get interrupted by a fart joke. The next tip might be a little controversial, but I think it is honestly the solution to a lot of in-game misunderstandings and confusion, and that is metagame. That's right, I am telling you to metagame. But not in the way most people associate with metagaming. Metagaming is simply when you use out-of-game knowledge to make decisions in-game, and sometimes that can be harmful. For example, if your character knows nothing about a monster but suddenly knows exactly what to do when combat breaks out with that monster, that might be seen as problematic by some people. All I'm suggesting, however, is using the knowledge that you are playing a game with your friends to make decisions. Don't say, I'm not sure why my character would want to keep adventuring with this party. Instead, try, I'm playing a game with my friends, so my character is going to stay with this party. Instead of, my character wouldn't know that our group already has 4 squishy casters, so I'm going to play a caster. Instead, try, I'm playing a game with my friends, and I want at least a little party balance, so I'll pick a frontliner. It isn't super complicated. You're playing a game with your friends. Just act like it. This also applies to confrontation. D&D has this wonderful way of blurring the lines between fantasy and reality, which can result in some beautiful moments of emotional exploration, and also, unfortunately, in full-blown arguments between players. The least, I repeat, the least effective way to handle these confrontations is in character. If a player is doing something that is annoying you or causing you genuine frustration to the point that you feel like you need to confront them about it, do it as yourself, not as your character. Simply say, hey, this is frustrating me, is this personal, or whatever. Again, it's a game with friends. It isn't meant to damage friendships. If anything, it's meant to build them up. Don't let something petty like in-game behavior get in the way of you having fun with your friends. Just end the roleplay and open the floor to real interaction. My final tip is a big one, and one that honestly isn't a huge problem with new players as much as it is with experienced ones, and that is assert. Don't argue. What I mean is basically, don't argue with your GM. At the end of the day, they are the ones running the game, and they are the ones who get the final say in any rulings. And nothing slows down a game or adds awkward tension between players more than when a player starts arguing with the GM on how something should be ruled. But that's not to say that a player can't assert a ruling for the GM's consideration. Obviously, there are certain things that a GM could be completely wrong about. For example, the saving throw a creature must make when subjected to the effects of a spell. If the GM is wrong about that, then the player should absolutely state the correct ruling in that situation and similar situations. But there are also times when a player might ask, could I justify using acrobatics instead of athletics? Which then allows the GM to consider whether or not there is a justification. By asserting a potential ruling, it can open the GM up to alternatives that may benefit the player. But if the GM says no, just end it there, even if you disagree. Like I said before, they are the ones running the game and they get the final say. Trust me when I say this. No GM likes saying no to their players, but sometimes things just don't benefit the players no matter what angle you look at it, and there isn't enough justification for the ruling to change. If we didn't challenge our players and put them in situations where they struggle, then the campaign would just feel like a cakewalk, and that just isn't fun. Every now and then, a ruling isn't going to work in your favor, and in the grand scheme of things, that's good. The most important thing is to avoid bogging down the session with excessive rules lawyering and let everyone play the game. It keeps things moving, and pacing is incredibly important for the game to continue to flow smoothly. All right, those are my top 5 tips for being a better D&D player. Let me know if you have any other tips in the comments below. Next week, I'll be getting back into the ranking of the archetypes with the Druid. But until then, thank you all very much for watching, and I'll see you around.